Hello all, welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes as everybody gets connected and we'll start in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, if you would like to, please feel free to put your law school and the year you are in law school, if you're currently in law school, in the chat box so we can see where you're all coming from. We'd also ask that you keep your mics on mute, but we would love to see you on camera if you'd like to go on camera. From all over. Very good. If you're just joining, welcome. We are just getting everyone in and connected. We'll start in just one moment. In the meantime, we have some people putting in their law school and their year. If they're currently in law school, we'd love to see that in the chat box. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's 2 after the hour. And first of all, I just want to say welcome to everyone. I know we've got some people still joining. If you're still joining and you want to, if you're in law school, feel free to put which law school and what year you are in the chat box. Please keep your microphones on mute. But if you do have a question, you're welcome to put that in the chat box. We will be monitoring it. And so an official hello to everyone and welcome to the Women in Tax Forum's Law Student Outreach Panel. My name is Bree Siciliano. I'm on the leadership board of the Women in Tax Forum, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today. And if you haven't already, I encourage all of you to turn on your cameras. We would love to see your faces. A quick note, this session is being recorded, so please do keep your microphones on mute. If you have questions, put them in the chat box. We're going to monitor it, as I said, and we will relay your questions to the panelists. The purpose of our event today is for you all to hear about tax as a career from a diverse group of panelists. These incredible women can offer insight into their tax careers, provide advice, and even suggest ways in which to make tax more inclusive. And I also wanted to let you know that the idea for this panel first surfaced during another one of our Women in Tax Forum events. It was a Zoom key, and in the chat box, tax court judge Layden wrote, "As someone who has been in the ABA tax section for more than 3 decades, I continue to be puzzled as to why we don't see more women and women of color at the section meetings. One thought is for us to arrange meetings or Zoom conferences with Tax 1 classes and professors to talk about why we have chosen tax as a career and ways in which we have approached our careers." And within minutes of Judge Layden writing this, many other people commented they thought it was a great idea and they wanted to help or participate. And from that initial idea, and with the support of many people in the Women in Tax Forum community, we had our first law student outreach panel in October of last year. And after that panel, Nina Olson, who is our moderator today, suggested a follow-up panel with a focus on public interest careers in tax law. And here we are today. Before we get to the panel itself, I do want to give a brief introduction to the Women in Tax Forum. For those of you who are not familiar with us, Sarah Ma, who is a member of our leadership team, will post a link to our LinkedIn page as well as our email address in the chat box for those of you who would like to get involved. In a nutshell, the Women in Tax Forum is part of the American Bar Association tax section that seeks to create a community that supports, empowers, and celebrates women as they build powerful tax careers across all regions and specialties. We are particularly focused on 3 pillars. The first one is community. We're committed to creating a safe space where we encourage one another to be our absolute best in every way, including within our tax careers. The second pillar is professional development. We work to provide opportunities for our members to develop their skill sets and learn from other successful women tax practitioners. And finally, our third pillar is leadership. We support one another to lead in our own style, even if that's different from other traditional styles of leadership. And finally, before we get started, there are so many people we need to thank. First, Joan Arnold, our tax section chair. Her continuous support and leadership have made the Women in Tax Forum possible. Thank you, Joan. Also, I'd like to thank the other members of the Women in Tax Forum Leadership Board, Heather Fincher, Lauren Azebu, and Sarah Ma. I'm honored to be part of the team with you. Thank you also to Brittany Johnson and Emily Eskin. If you heard about this event, it was probably because of their efforts marketing this event. And finally, thanks to DeMarcus Freeman and others at the ABA for helping us every step of the way. And now I will turn it over to our moderator, Anita Olson, to introduce herself and our panelists.
Great. Thank you, Bree. And I also want to thank the Women in Tax program, Joan, Heather, you, Bree, Brittany, Laura. And let us not forget DeMarcus and Sarah, for really helping us pull this panel together and doing this really important initiative. I'm very excited about this panel. Part of the reason why I wanted to do it was because when I used to teach at Georgetown Law, a class on social policy, social policy through the tax system, as an adjunct professor, I would canvass the class before in the first meeting and ask people what they wanted to do. And every single seminar attendee said, I would love to go into public interest law, but I can't afford it because of the loans. And it used to break my heart that that would be the answer. So I really wanted to have a program that would show the paths of different women into public interest law, or in being in public interest law and moving into other areas, so that you could sort of see some alternate career paths. And along that line, I thought I'd just briefly, before I introduce the rest of the panelists, talk briefly about my career, because I am by far the most unlikely human being to be a tax lawyer. My undergraduate degree was in fine arts, and the only reason why I got into tax was by preparing tax returns for other artists and musicians and actors and all sorts of people that were in the arts professions in order to keep myself alive. And one thing led to another, and I decided that I would go to law school at night at the age of 36. I was a single mother, and it took 4 years. It was at an historically Black university, North Carolina Central School of Law. I am a big supporter of North Carolina Central. And it was an incredible experience for me. And then I took the next 4 years commuting from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. one night a week to get my LLM in taxation from Georgetown. And we'll talk a little bit about LLMs because that's apparently a big topic, but I did that because I was a solo practitioner and I felt I needed that extra education. What came out of that was connections to a lot of different people. Everybody knew me because I was the insane person driving from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. for an LLM. And when the time came to start the clinic that I founded, the Community Tax Law Project, which was the first in the country that was an independent low-income taxpayer clinic. There were about 13 or 14 of them at the time in 1992 that were at law schools and accounting schools. It was because there was no outlet for me to do pro bono work in the field that I knew, which was tax. And I wasn't comfortable doing pro bono work in other areas. That wasn't what I was. So I was a tax lawyer. So I founded the clinic, and the rest is kind of history. The clinic sort of projected me on a national stage, and the next thing I knew, there were people asking me to what I'd consider being the National Taxpayer Advocate. But I lay my path out because if you had asked me in 1974, what was I going to do with my life, I would be living on a dairy farm in Maine, painting. Now I still want to live, on a goat farm somewhere, and spin, but that's not what I'm doing right now. So the other members of the panel all have really interesting career paths, and I'll just go through briefly and then we'll just start talking. So Tameka Lester, her path has been academia and doing the low-income taxpayer clinic there. She is a clinical associate professor of law at Georgia State University College of Law. And she is the associate director of the clinic there. And the Georgia State Clinic is one of the oldest and so well established and so well integrated in the community. And I think it's going to be very important to hear Tameka's career path. Mary Gillum is director of the Legal Aid Society's low-income taxpayer clinic known as the Tennessee Taxpayer Project. And Mary is in the class of the first group of LITCs that got funding back in 1999 when the funding was first enacted in 1998. And I had the pleasure of meeting Mary in that first year when I went out to do a 2-day training for her project and the volunteer lawyers. And I was just so blown away by the quality of work that legal aid was doing in that part of the community in Tennessee. And it's just, Mary's work has been extraordinary, and she's been the lawyer on many really important and precedential cases defending taxpayer rights. Susan Morgenstern is another person in that first class. She was actually a legal services lawyer first, and then moved into tax law. She was not a tax lawyer at the start, and moved into the LITC, the Cleveland Legal Aid Society. And I recruited her to be the local taxpayer advocate for Cleveland office of Ohio. And now she is the supervisory attorney advisor in the Taxpayer Advocate Service in the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate. And so she's got the career path of legal aid to low-income taxpayer clinic to government work in the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Anita Soucy is someone that I've known for, should I say it, decades. I hired her straight out of law school at the Community Tax Law Project as the first English as a second language attorney in a low-income taxpayer clinic. And she was partially funded by the National Legal Aid Defenders Association and partially funded by the American Bar Association tax section. And it was before they had the fellows in the ABA, and Anita basically paved the way and showed how important it was to have fellows. And it was her fellowship that the current fellow program is modeled after. Anita then was hired immediately after her 2-year fellowship at my clinic to go into private practice in a very important accounting firm, and then went into law and then controversy practice, and then did a stint in Treasury as an attorney advisor, and now has come back out, did some more controversy practice, and now is at Deloitte as the chief quality officer and the deputy chief risk officer. So you sort of have a career path of starting at an LITC, going into practice, going into Treasury, coming out into practice, and going into a Big Four firm. And finally, we have Christine Spidell, who also is now, she's the assistant professor and director of the federal tax clinic at Villanova's College of Law. But Christine, like Susan, started with a legal services entity, not as a tax lawyer, moved over to the low-income taxpayer clinic in that legal services entity, and now has moved into academia, running, both being an assistant professor, but also running the student tax clinic at Villanova. So I'm going to leave it there, but just even in that introduction, I think you can see the various career paths that are really open to you through working in public interest law. And the last thing I'll say is I was poking around last night, for those of you that are worried about student loans, you can go and find out about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is available to people who work in both either government or nonprofits. And if you establish an income-driven repayment plan, and there are various plans that you can work on, and make 120 qualifying payments, that's 10 years, but it's based on your income at the time and your family status at the time. And if you do that for 10 years, and they don't have to be 10 consecutive years, the remainder of your student debt is forgiven. And by the way, it's not cancellation of debt income. So that, you know, there's another real reason for those of you that are worried about your loans to go into public interest law or government work. Okay, so who wants to start? Tameka, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm fine with starting. Thanks for the introduction, Nina. I'm really happy to be with you guys today. As Nina said, I took a pretty winding road to get to where I am now, because law really wasn't my first career. I have an undergraduate degree in integrated marketing communications from Winthrop University, which is a small liberal arts college in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And immediately after undergrad, I started working for a marketing firm as an account manager and doing some copywriting. And while I didn't really like the position, it really was a great first job for me, because it gave me an opportunity to start building my professional soft skills, which was really important for me. So I started learning how to build my communication skills, both orally and in writing with peers and with people in a supervisory role. I learned office etiquette, how to conduct meetings, how to understand the importance of deadlines and meeting deliverables. And so I did that for several years. And then I transitioned into banking. I lived in Charlotte at the time. Charlotte was a huge banking town. And so I moved over into banking, first in a customer service role, then moving into a leadership position on a back office support team. And then ultimately as a business analyst who supported a senior leader. And I really loved banking. I learned a lot there. I enjoyed the people I worked with and the organizational culture. And that was my first indication that that was important to me. That was something that I really valued. And I learned a lot of other things too. I learned the importance of building solid professional relationships, a solid reputation, also how to complete or how to create effective processes, run good projects, and how to start developing my leadership skills. While I was in banking, I decided to go get an MBA. And so I did that while I was in banking. And that really did help to kind of develop my overall business understanding. I think a lot of times as an employee, you are used to looking at your work from like 10 feet. And the great thing about getting an MBA and supporting a senior leader is it taught me to look at the work from 50 feet, 100 feet, 500 feet. So I could really see how my work and the work of others really effectuated change in the organization. While I was getting the MBA, I said, hey, I like school. Why don't I go to law school? I had a cousin who was a lawyer. She really encouraged me to pursue a law degree. And so like Nina, I decided to go to North Carolina Central, and I started in the evening program as well. That's right, Legal Eagles. And so I started in the evening program and I continued to work full time. And so I drove between Charlotte and Durham 3 days a week so I could go to school for a year. The first year I was in the car for like almost 20 hours a week. It was super crazy. But that was, how I started law school. And then after that, I transitioned to the full-time program, and I took an educational leave from banking, thinking I was going back, because admittedly, I had no desire to really be a tax lawyer or a lawyer at all. In my mind, I said, you know what, law will be a tool in my toolbox. It'll be something that informs my overall business outlook, and I'll end up in the C-suite, CEO, COO, CMO, something like that. And so I really had no plans of becoming a lawyer, but rather going back into banking and using my law degree in that way. But my undergraduate institution required basic tax as a class. So everyone had to take it. And it was in basic tax that I really fell in love with tax in this area of law. It just made sense to me. It just really clicked for me. And so in basic tax, I earned one of the highest grades in our class. And my professor actually called me afterwards, and he said, you obviously have a knack for this. You should take more tax classes. And that's what I did. I took advanced tax and estate and gift, corporate tax, partnership tax, which was a hard thing to do. And I took all the other tax classes that my school had to offer. I ended up getting the tax certificate program at my school, and I started working at the LITC as a student, which is where I fell in love with public interest work and working in the LITC community. After graduation, again, really loved tax, but really didn't know how I was going to fit that in because I wasn't interested in getting an LLM. I had been in school forever. I had 3 degrees at that point. And so that wasn't really something that I was interested in doing. But luckily, my school had received the grant from the National Taxpayer Advocate to start an LITC. And so they were looking for a clinic director. And so I talked to the professors that were hiring for the position, asked more about it. And they said, honestly, we want someone who loves tax and understands controversy work, but more than that, we need someone who knows how to build a business because it's a new clinic. We need someone who knows how to get out in the community, do education and outreach, and really build this program into something that we'll be really proud of. And so I said, wow, this sounds like my dream job. And I remember telling them that in my interview. I said, this is something that really allows me to keep all of my skills intact while still really contributing a lot. I had a background in marketing, I had a background in business, and understood the importance of building effective processes and having effective systems in place. I love doing community work, but then I also really love tax. And so telling them that in my interview obviously worked. And so I was able to secure the position and ultimately entered into this community and have never left. It has proven to be everything I thought it would be and more. I've grown in ways I could have never imagined, been able to do things I never thought I would be able to do. And working with students, advocating for taxpayers, working in the community really has been really rewarding work for me too. So that's kind of how I've ended up here.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mary, you want to tell your story?
Sure. And it's fascinating listening to the stories because I can see some similarities and some differences. So yeah, I'll delve into my background a little bit and how I got where I'm at today, working as a tax attorney. I was born and raised in a really small rural community in the Appalachian coal fields of East Tennessee. Our community was really plagued with poverty. There was a lot of isolation and limited resources, which really drove the cycle of poverty. I was able to observe that discrimination, inequality, and injustice actually permeated economically disadvantaged communities. And as a result of that, and through these observations, I knew at that point, even when I was fairly young, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to help balance those scales and provide equal access to justice. But really, that's all I knew at that time. I didn't know I wanted to be a tax lawyer. I just knew I wanted to fight for against injustices that I had witnessed. So one of the things I always saw that was important was to find a niche. And so I wanted to find a niche as an attorney. I was interested in science and math. So when I went to the University of Tennessee undergraduate program, I studied chemical engineering for 2.5 years. Not a lot of people know that. Don't talk about that a lot. Although I did get to help my daughter this year through her virtual learning, learn how to balance chemical equations. So finally I put something to use from the 2.5 years of study of chemical engineering. But that is what I worked on. Midway through pursuing my bachelor's degree, a counselor at the University of Tennessee College of Law asked if I could see myself doing this type of work if I didn't get into law school. And I really hadn't thought about that because I'm going to law school. But since the answer was no, I changed my major. So I couldn't see myself working in that field the rest of my life. So I changed my major to accounting and business law. I knew accounting must involve numbers and involve taxes. I had always prepared my own tax return. Even when I was in high school, I did a tax return as a dependent and filed the tax returns. And also in undergraduate, I prepared tax returns for some of my friends in law school. In undergraduate. And so I enjoyed preparing the tax returns. And I knew that accounting and business law involved transactional analysis. And again, business law concepts. So at that point, I started developing an interest in accounting and in tax law. And while in college, I started a VITA site in my community. Then I kind of expanded out and started VITA sites in Knoxville around the university and really enjoyed that. Before I realized what was going on, I was managing about 12 VITA sites. So my interest in tax became deeply rooted at that point. But while I was in college, most of my paid work opportunities involved social work. I was commuting back and forth. I commuted an hour one way while I was working on my undergraduate degree. And so while I was back home, the paid work opportunities in social work helped me get a job working for the Tennessee Department of Health and Human Services and Tennessee's first wave of welfare reform. So I started teaching women who were receiving aid to family with AFDC benefits, aid for families with dependent children, in a class that they had to complete in 4 weeks as a condition of receiving their benefits. And as part of that course, I taught survival skills. I taught a little bit about basic skills, but most importantly, I brought in a lot of community resources. And one of the community resources that I brought in was the legal aid program in my community. I had speakers and attorneys from the legal aid program talk about the work they do and talk about the services they provide and offer to provide services to the participants that were in that class. So that's where I really developed some relationships with other attorneys in an area that I felt particularly interesting. I thought, wow, this public interest work sounds like a lot of fun. And this is really what has compelled me to start my career, look at a career in law school when I was younger. So fast forward a little bit, after I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and with an accounting, or the major in accounting and business law, I decided to work for a couple of years because I didn't have a lot of financial options. And law school, and I was finishing up paying for mostly undergraduate able to pay for tuition. I don't know if I could do that now, but with the rising cost of tuition. But so I worked for 3 years. For part of that time, continued working for the Department of Human Services in social work. The other part of the time, I went ahead and, since I had an accounting degree, started working for a local CPA firm in my community, and where I prepared massive amounts of individual, partnership, and corporate tax returns. I enjoyed the work with the CPA firm. I didn't like billing clients. That was not my favorite part, but I did enjoy the work immensely. So when I went to law school, I was really saying, okay, this is what I want to do is I want to be a tax lawyer when I went to law school. And but I really didn't see how my interest in tax law could merge with my interest in public interest law. So what I did is I made connections at the law school. I had the University of Tennessee had a mentoring program. So I was assigned a professor, not a tax law professor, just one of the professors of the law school. And I always communicated my interest in public interest work and in tax law. I also went and visited the clinical program that the University of Tennessee College of Law housed. And I talked to the clinic director about my interest in that program. It was suggested that maybe I clerk somewhere with a public interest firm, because maybe, tax was not where I would find a fit for what I was interested in. And so I started clerking at the Rural Legal Services, which was the attorneys that I would often have come out and speak to my class when I was working with the Department of Human Services. And so I spoke with them, and then I started clerking with them. But as a student coming from limited means, I've always tried to find a way, even though it was a volunteer position, to fund my work. So I can tell you, all through law school, when I was clerking with, and I ended up clerking for 2 different legal aid programs, one in the city in Knoxville where the law school was, and the one where I had created relationships through the work I'd done with the Department of Human Services. So I end up basically clerking most of the time of my law school career, but I end up getting it funded through the Tennessee Association for Public Interest Law student group at the University of Tennessee College of Law. I also received and applied for AmeriCorps NCLC stipends. And so all throughout law school, I was always tapping into some kind of resource or subsidy to fund my work, even though I was volunteering through the legal aid program. And then the perfect storm happened. While I was in law school, the 1998 Restructuring Reform Act was born. Within that, there was funding for low-income taxpayer clinics. And actually, my mentor professor at the law school had said something. Did you hear about the 98 Restructuring Reform Act? Oh, yes, I did. Of course, I'm interested in tax. But did you realize that there's funding for low-income taxpayer clinics, and maybe this is something you should pursue? So at that point, I organized a meeting with the legal aid program's director, which is Neil McBride, and I organized and brought in the clinical director at the law school. And we all talked about a way that we could partner and start a low-income taxpayer clinic program. And that's how the low-income taxpayer clinic program that I co-founded started, as when I was, I think, my second year in law school at the University of Tennessee College of Law. But it didn't stop there. I didn't know for sure that we would get the grant. So we all worked together to apply for a grant. And we were all going to be partners in this low-income taxpayer clinic grant. The University of Tennessee College of Law was looking for a clinical aspect for their transactional students like myself, who were wanting to go into business or into tax. And so as part of that low-income taxpayer clinic program, I would agree to be the professor for one of their clinical classes and bring in students and give them hands-on or real-world experience with tax cases. And so that is how we got started. But then I turned around and applied for grant fellowships through SCAD-NARPS and through the Equal Justice Works, which helped. I didn't get the SCAD-NARPS fellowship, but I ended up getting the Equal Justice Works fellowship. And the great thing is that provided matching funds initially for our low-income taxpayer clinic program, which we continue to grow. So that is really just as a look back how I got started with my career. And I have been with the legal aid program for 20 years. I've had some great opportunities to go elsewhere, but it would require moving because I'm so wed to the community that I live in. And I'm kind of got used to the traveling. And I did travel back and forth to law school 2 hours every day, 1 hour there, 1 hour back. So I really love the community I'm in. But I found other ways that we'll talk about, I guess, a little bit later on today. I found other ways to go beyond to get some real satisfaction through my work, even though I haven't changed the position as a clinic director in 20 years. As Nina talked about, I've had some really good opportunities to be involved in some tax law cases that have some precedent-setting results, and that's been particularly rewarding. I've also thoroughly enjoyed the law students that I bring in, and I've seen them go off in different career paths that I can talk about a little bit later. It just provided me with opportunities that I really didn't see when I first started. So I'm very grateful for that, and I thoroughly enjoy the work that I do. But I will stop right now and let another panelist talk a little bit about their background.
Well, thank you, Mary. And I'm already seeing a theme emerging that commuting long distances is something that we seem to all be doing or have done. So Susan, you get to top Mary's story.
I can't top Mary's story because I turned to Mary when I first started our LITC in Cleveland, but I'm going to back up a bit. So Nina, you were an art history major. I was a geography major. And thought I would study, I was really interested in how people live in their communities and shape their communities and sort of replicate prior living patterns and so on. So that has nothing to do with tax law. And I couldn't find a job doing that, although I bounced around a little bit. But the last place I bounced to was a community organizing group in Rhode Island. And it was great. We were all these activist people working on a variety of issues, particularly utility regulation. And I thought, oh man, this is the coolest thing in the world is utility regulation. And how do you structure utility rates? And we would go, stomping around and go to like the CEO of the utility company and while he was playing golf and say lower our rates. And then there were the legal issues that arose in connection with our work that made me look at what these we were represented by legal services. And I looked at these legal services lawyers and I thought, man, what you were doing is really cool because what you're doing is extending the work that we do and taking it into a different forum. And I thought, when I grow up, I want to be a legal services lawyer. So I am still growing up, by the way, but I did go to law school and pursue this legal services career. It meant so much to me to pursue a career in legal services. I was profoundly interested in social justice, in rights of disenfranchised individuals, and I wanted to work at a legal services program that had a very aggressive social justice mission and which really encouraged large-scale litigation and really reform litigation. And those were my search criteria when I looked at legal services programs. I ended up in Cleveland, which, there are a lot of jokes about Cleveland, but I have to say I love Cleveland, except when I came for my interview, we flew in and it was like circling over the Arctic Circle. I could not believe that I was choosing to interview in a job in a place that looked like the Arctic Circle. I got out of the train to walk down the street. The wind was blowing so hard off of Lake Erie that I could not walk down the street. I was late for my interview. I thought I blew it, and then I got the job. The job at that point, initially I started as a sort of general legal services attorney, housing, welfare, unemployment, social security, evictions, consumer rights, whatever walked in the door was what I handled. And eventually I developed sort of a niche practice looking at consumer law cases, and I thought, bring me the paper. I love analyzing all these complex transactions, but also looking at public benefits cases, not so much the entitlement, but the post-entitlement, what happened once you got the benefits and you had to deal sort of with the accounting of ensuring that the benefits were properly computed and that the back award was properly computed. And this opened the door for me into really significant litigation. And we started coordinating litigation across the country, doing massive class actions at a time when class litigation was allowed at legal services programs. And then I started having kids. And I know one of the questions that people ask about this kind of career, where you really have to be, you are essentially a solo practitioner in your program, is, well, how do you balance the kids and career thing? I was tremendously fortunate in my employer gave me, I have 2 children. I got 7 months off with my first child. I had a year off with my second child. I returned part-time, and legal services income is really pretty low. I found that I was in effect subsidizing legal aid when I looked at what I was spending on childcare versus what I earned. So I thought, I was carrying the health insurance for our family, and my husband's income was not much higher than mine. So this was really a time of great struggle for us. But we looked at what we were paying, what we could purchase if we went elsewhere for health insurance. And I remember making the appointment to go in to talk to our executive director to say that I had to quit. And I said to myself, I will be strong, I will be strong. And of course, I walked into his office and burst into tears and said, I need to quit this job because I can't afford to work. I'm going to start crying now as I recall this conversation. And I remember him coming around to say, don't quit, take 3 years off. So they held my job for what ended up being 3.5 years. And I came back, and during that time, welfare reform happened. And I looked at my list of clients and I started thinking, looking at their income, each of them was receiving some form of public benefits. Ohio took a very narrow view and said 3 years and you're out and you have to be independent. And I thought, oh my God, what does this mean? This means they'll have income. And what does income mean? Well, I had heard about this thing called the Earned Income Credit. So I ended up talking to a friend of mine at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities with whom I worked when I was doing community organizing, and that was John Wanchek. And John said, there's this thing, there's this program, you can apply for some money and start doing tax work. And help people get the Earned Income Credit. And I was like, really? That sounds kind of cool. And I thought getting the Earned Income Credit was like applying for food stamps. You file a tax return, you get a check in the mail, like life is great. So we applied for the program. I remember talking to my executive director. Initially, he was hesitant. This is not a traditional poverty law practice area. We're all about welfare benefits. We're not about taxes. There aren't any poverty law attorneys that do tax. We got our first grant. It was, $30,000, some small amount. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is real. I hated tax in law school. I hated tax when I had to study it for the bar. And I started thinking, what is going to happen if we start getting cases? What am I going to do? So luckily, my executive director knew Mary's executive director, Neil McBride. And that was my first phone call, was to Mary. What am I doing? And Mary was extraordinarily generous. And I'll never forget, you told me the issue codes for cases and so forth. I was also extraordinarily lucky that there is a very active pro bono community in Cleveland. And Tom Callahan, who's the past chair of the section, offered up his firm and gave me partners to work with, gave me associates to work with, people, and gave me their library, because at Legal Aid, our library was pretty small, and we certainly didn't have a tax library. And so through their generosity, I was able to learn all about the practitioner priority service. I mean, this is stuff they don't teach you in law school, but you got to know in order to represent your clients. And I started thinking about how lonely I felt as a tax lawyer at Legal Aid. I mean, I was the only one. People looked at me like, oh my God, she's so weird. She's doing tax law. And I looked at the other legal aid programs across Ohio where there wasn't a tax practice, but where I knew they had my clients, my kind of clients, the ones who had just started working, who were struggling to make ends meet. And then I started, sort of looking across the country at similar types of programs. And Mary and I put together with actually somebody from CTLP, a 3-day, I think it was, training program for the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. This was, I think, in 2002. And Mandy Matlock was in our group. And Mandy then ran the program in Austin, is now the local taxpayer advocate in Austin. So I think, Mary, we can take responsibility for grooming Mandy. But through this, I met, a huge number of attorneys who wanted to work in tax law, but were terrified. And so formed a network group initially in Ohio, got every clinic, every legal aid funded in Ohio to have an LITC. We used to meet Ashley face-to-face and then by phone. And then our group grew to include, 15, 16 states of legal services attorneys. So to reduce that feeling of isolation, to share skills and to educate each other. So I left legal aid a couple of years ago to come to TAS, as Nina said, to run the Cleveland office, to be a local taxpayer advocate there. And I have to say, working there was amazing. It was like being a kid in a candy store. There were all these issues, all kinds of taxpayers, rich taxpayers, poor taxpayers, big businesses, small businesses, state governments, churches, all kinds of nonprofits. It was just incredible. And issues that we would see, substantive issues, procedural issues, it was dazzling. And I am enormously grateful to have had that opportunity and the ability to work with, a different set of truly passionate and committed advocates. And now I get to sort of ratchet it up a notch to work with the attorney advisors to the National Taxpayer Advocate, where, it's even like more dazzling if such a thing could be possible. So that's who I am. And I forgot to give you my disclaimer at the beginning that I work for the government. The views that I'm expressing today are my own. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'm so glad I don't have to give that disclaimer ever again. That's wonderful. So Anita is next. And so Anita gets to describe her path so far. We have an undergraduate in fine arts. We have one in marketing, civil engineering start, and then geography. So let's hear it, Anita.
So double major in Hispanic literature and econ over here. So certainly not pre-law, but it really described why I went to law school. I wanted to work and use my language skills in a setting where I could conduct representation in Spanish. So that was originally the idea. So I thought for certain I was going to be an immigration lawyer. That didn't pan out. So I did take, I guess why I'm here, maybe I like to win, or potentially I'm very lazy, but I had an immigration case and a tax case, and the immigration case went terribly wrong and the tax case went terribly right. So I ended up thinking, hey, you know what, there's something to this tax thing that might be beneficial. But I will say, just like the other panelists that we have here today, I'm hearing a common theme of how much drive everyone has and how much drive all of you have for joining us today, holding onto your career, grabbing it, and not just being a tumbleweed, blown throughout. You're really grabbing here the bull by the horns. And certainly I think the same is for me, just taking action. As I said, my first job out of law school was working at a low-income taxpayer clinic. That really opened my eyes to tax. I did conduct my representation in Spanish, or not only, but because I had some other English-speaking clients, but I really look forward to helping that community. And, I got to do some great things, like go on a Spanish language radio station and talk about tax in Spanish. And, that was fantastic. But the first experience really did open my eyes to how great tax is. There's so much social and economic policy that runs through the tax code. You've heard examples from Susan and others around earned income tax or charitable, status of organizations. There's everything. There's insurance, there's utilities. Like you name an industry, you're going to be able to find something in tax that will cater to that industry. Recent examples, of course, the Affordable Care Act, the CARES Act, that is, helping our country get back on their feet due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's all delivered through the tax code, folks. So if you want to be where the action is, you want to be with the tax lawyers. So that's my first sale there. But certainly in my own career, I've just worked in a lot of different environments. One, you heard about the LITC, and I then subsequently went to a law firm. I went to a second law firm. I taught as an adjunct law professor at Georgetown's LLM program. I also, after a while at my law firms, went to the Department of Treasury in a tax policy position. After leaving that position, I went to a global accounting firm where I practiced in tax. And certainly now I'm actually performing both a tax and a non-tax role in risk management and crisis management for the firm. So, I think that my lesson would be wherever you go, first of all, it's okay to change things up. I've always found that every time I change a job, it's like a little bit of a kick in the butt, right? To just do something new, challenge yourself, and, just, try to do something new and I guess just be fearless, right? Because you're going to go into an unknown. And I love Susan's description of, everyone is afraid to work in tax. I have found that in my career, and it's been a super secret weapon for me getting ahead because, other people will say, oh, I don't want to work on that. Like the general litigators, they do not want to touch tax with like a 10-foot pole because they're afraid that they're going to make some like procedural misstep and it's going to be some giant malpractice or whatever. And so I was always able to raise my hand to say, oh, I'll take that. I'll take that case and I can handle it independently, right? So it was an ability for me to sort of rise to the top and, kind of what I'll call above my station in terms of my years of seniority. So that was also, a great accelerator to my career. I also found just taking things with you from role to role. Like I worked at a low-income taxpayer clinic. As Nina knows, and many of the other speakers, you handle some collection issues. I went into private practice. The issues were very different. Some deficiency litigation, some refund litigation, but some of the, sorry for the police, by the way. So there was certainly an ability to bring in things that only I knew. Like, for example, I had a client that was, a high net worth individual, and they started getting liens and levies, no doubt, because the IRS computers were all a mess and, they didn't process something. And, and people were like, does anyone know collection, right? And I was like, me, I know collection, right? And it was because I had worked at the LITC, where none of my other law firm colleagues had, they had gone right directly from law school into their private practice. So, no one really knew collection. So I think that's another example of just things you can do, to get to know something new and I think someone said, getting to be in a niche. So the other advice I would give is, a career is a really long thing, and I see such great law schools and represented here in the chat. Don't rush your career. It's okay to do things for a couple of years, learn something new, move on, take it with you. And the advice I like to give is make sure that you connect your worlds between all of those different changes that you take in your career. And, an example that, Nina, I'm sure likes to give as well is while I was working in private practice, I had an opportunity to network with individuals that were, had a lot of charitable giving and, were very fortunate in life and wanted to look to share, their fortune. And some of them, of course, were going through tax, problems with the IRS. And, you kind of get into a conversation and say, geez, you have really good, law firms representing you here. And do you know there's people that have to go try to fight with the IRS on their own? Like those people are just sitting ducks. They're going to get completely run over by the IRS. And, there's these organizations out there that they specialize in the issues that, and it's systemic because you kind of have seen one taxpayer go through this. There's like, another, I don't know, 20,000 with the identical notice and the identical fact pattern out there, right? And, that really was compelling because, the donors would say, geez, this, I have the best lawyers money can buy. And, that's really compelling that somebody else, can't afford lawyers and, trying to fight the IRS on their own. And So it results in a situation where, they start getting interested in the LITCs and thinking about donating to them. And, and even among my law firm colleagues, like they were very interested in either pro bono or, making donations to the LITC community. So it's a way to give back to those communities that, you were in before, and maybe when you do move on, or if you decide to move on into private practice, certainly you can connect those worlds. So I think that's another piece of advice I would give this group, is just nothing is sort of permanent, and you can just change things up, and you can always argue what you did is going to be impactful and beneficial for your next employer or whatever your next gig is. Finally, I would just note that I'm married to another tax lawyer who was introduced to me by a third tax lawyer who I overlapped with at Treasury. And I have a 10-year-old daughter. And I try to prove to be an example to her. And, sometimes it's really interesting lessons come out of that. So the other day she had to do an essay about who she admired. And she wrote an essay about her mom, me, that said she admires her mom because her mom is a very good boss. Now, I'd never actually called myself a boss. This is something that she took into account because I lead a very large team at Deloitte. And she has heard me say things, which who knows what they would pick up. But, when I have to go take a call and be there for someone on their time frame, not on my own, because that's what they need at that minute, that is what I'm here for. And I have to explain to my daughter, I have to go do this because somebody needs some of my time. And, and I think she wrote that was a really good thing, that I was very considerate of other people that she had observed in, spending time. So I think that's the same thing with mentoring. It's the same thing with leading large teams at whatever your job is, whether it be in any of the areas that wherever you land. So it's just something to think about in terms of providing a good example. And, I was very thunderstruck by Susan's story and other stories around having kids and still trying to work. And, these are really difficult challenges. But when I hear the drive on the phone about people who are driving an hour just to attend their law school classes in person and driving back, I know that all of you have the commitment, to do that. And I will leave with, it's interesting, I was reading an article about women. In the article, the author was positing that women police differently than men. And it was talking about policing, which of course, as everyone knows, is a really hot topic. And I have to say that I think women lawyer differently in some ways. And my observation, I recently had an event, which was kind of funny. It was an all-female cast. There was a policewoman, a detective, a prosecutor, the defense, and the witnesses were all women. It was like sort of an all-female cast. And I couldn't believe the professionalism and the efficiency that was going on in this environment. And, I just have to say that I don't know if it was the fact that it was, the uniform gender, but it was really just interesting to see and observe. So, I can say, 22 years ago, Nina, when you and I met, like, that's not what you would encounter. So just so many gains that, we've made, and, how successful we are in our careers has just very inspired me. And I'm just inspired to be here with all of you as you start out on these journeys. So thank you for inviting me, Nina. I'll turn it back to you.
This is great. Thank you so much. So Christine, this is now your turn to tell your story, and thank you.
Wonderful. This is such an inspiring panel, and I think it's clear that there's no one way to get into tax or to have a career in law or in anything else. So for me, I was a kid who didn't really know what they wanted to do. I was interested in languages. I was interested in dance. I was interested in reading and writing. So I was very much a liberal arts student. And for me, it was a summer job that really got me interested in law, and specifically in public interest law. I worked for Community Legal Services in Washington State, where I'm from, on issues concerning the migrant farm worker population that's in Eastern Washington. And so I looked at all of these public interest lawyers, all these legal services lawyers, and how dedicated they were to their clients, and not just to their clients, but to making systems better for people. And I decided that, hey, this looks like a great job. They're having fun, they're wonderful people, and they're doing meaningful work. So I went to law school to do public interest law. And one of the things that I did in law school, which I recommend to students, is it tried to use externships and summer jobs as a way to figure out what organizational culture you care about, where you might fit in, where you could see yourself working. And so I did a summer at a policy shop, and decided policy wasn't for me. I wanted to be on the ground. I wanted to be working with people. I wanted to be litigating cases. And I really, in my law school clinics, fell in love with domestic violence work. And so I thought I wanted to be a domestic violence attorney, and looked nationwide for legal services jobs when I graduated. One thing that people don't always realize is that it's really hard to get a job in legal services. There aren't that many of them because the funding is so low. So I looked nationwide. My husband also wanted a legal services job, so we needed two. And it turned out that we both got interviews for legal services jobs in Honolulu, Hawaii, and Vermont. And Vermont offered us the jobs first, so we went to Vermont. And so I started my practice in domestic violence, and also doing some public benefits work, food stamps and Medicaid and unemployment in Vermont. And this was 2006, 2007 when I started in legal services. And it didn't take that long to realize that a lot of my clients had tax problems, and that, specifically my domestic violence survivor clients who were trying to leave abusive relationships, they were often really caught in a trap of financial control, and the tax system was being used as another means of control, and whether they got their refund or not, that $3,000 to $5,000 at the time could make or break whether they made it out. One of the facts of domestic violence work is that often your clients will not follow through with their plans, and they'll go back to their abusive spouse. And just seeing how important those economic supports were to whether they made it out really made me interested in tax. And Vermont Legal Aid had a tax grant. We had a low-income tax clinic, but the attorney doing the work was really passionate about housing and wanted to do something else. So I volunteered, hey, I'll take over the tax work if you ever need somebody to do tax cases. This is really interesting. I think it'd be fun. I think it would be meaningful. And so not too long after that, I got the chance to take over that work and take over the clinic. And I just found that I really loved it. I had no idea I would end up in tax at all. But it was really rewarding, and there's such a supportive community of low-income tax lawyers in the US. Thanks, one of the first people that I called was also Mary Gillum. So she came out and she provided training and help to our clinic, and Susan Morgenstern, with the network that she created, was also super important to me in figuring out how to practice tax. And I got so into it, not just the individual cases, the systemic work, trying to change bigger problems, and then just wanted to spend more time reading and writing and thinking about tax. When you're in legal services, you have to go where you have funding. And so I was always being told, you're doing too many tax cases. We can't afford it. Stop doing tax. I could never be 100% tax in that job because we couldn't afford it. So I moved to Villanova to direct the tax clinic. And now I can spend all of my time thinking about tax and reading about tax, and I can take as many tax cases as I want. And so that's really sort of liberating to have found that thing that I really love, and be able to spend lots of time just going deeper into those issues. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Nina.
I think everybody who's spoken so far has been incredibly modest about their own accomplishments. And I think, one of the things that I learned from our own, running my clinic, and then obviously overseeing all of the clinics for about, 16 years, was just the diversity of the work, but also the importance of the work, taking cases that actually bring about systemic change. And what Christine hasn't talked about was that she was one of the attorneys on a very important case this past year, dealing with the economic impact payments for Social Security recipients who were not able to timely, within 40 hours, enter in their dependents onto this IRS non-filer portal in order to get the economic impact payment for their dependents. And the IRS's position was, if you missed the 40-hour deadline, you have to wait until 2021 and file your return. And of course, these are some of the most low-income taxpayers in the United States. And they had no support system because we were all shut down with the pandemic and, doing things online when it wasn't mobile enabled, the portal, it wasn't in, it was completely inaccessible for a whole swath of taxpayers. And Christine and Community Legal Services brought a case that never got tried, but drove the IRS to change its position. And so after, the Department of Justice, saying there's no standing, there's no nothing, they basically caved. And the IRS opened up the portal and the Social Security recipients were able to enter their dependent information and get their payments. And that is the kind of, and that is, that happened in that short amount of time is amazing. And it really took, I think, the fact that Christine had worked in legal aid before, and so she had the connections with the legal services people. It was just really a fascinating case. And there are many other instances for that. And I think, that kind of systemic work is so gratifying when you can actually see that you not just won one case, but you actually changed procedures and a position of the IRS as a result of it. I can remember in the community tax law project, we had a volunteer lawyer from one of the large accounting firms in Virginia, large law firms in Virginia. And she was just straight out of law school and she was she'd been assigned to asset securitization unit in the law firm. But we handed her a case that ended up being a fully stipulated case in the tax court, and all that there needed to be were briefs written, all the facts were stipulated. And the tax court made a decision that then basically neither side liked, and we appealed it to the Fourth Circuit. And so there she is, her first year out of law school, and she's the lawyer on a Fourth Circuit appellate case. And all the lawyers in the appellate, section of the law firm were like, how did you get this case? And it was just, that's what happens when you work in the clinics, that you get experience that you may not be able to get in a regular practice, for several years. You might be working behind the scenes, but you're not going to be the lead lawyer on an appellate case. I can tell you that. So I don't know who wants to weigh in on this, and Bree, we may have some questions. I know people wanted to talk about the LLM. I've told you why I got it. And I certainly learned things that I never put into practice, but it was very good to understand the whole, the whole picture of the tax system, if you will.
And so, Nina, we've had a few questions. I would say that the themes are first around the LLM and what you recommend, which we know it's a personal decision, but if the panelists have thoughts on that. Another theme around the questions is about being a woman or woman of color in the tax field, and how that sometimes puts you as occasionally the only woman in the room, those sorts of questions. And then the final question we got is about if you have multiple interests, for example, tax and constitutional law, do you need to make a choice between the two? Is there a way to marry things up in law school? Those are the themes I've seen so far in the questions that have been posed to me.
One thing, I'm going to take that constitutional law thing and then maybe go to Tameka to talk about, a person of color. But again, with the economic impact payment, we have seen significant cases dealing with tax issues in constitutional law. And you all know the story of, on the basis of sex, and that, everybody would say there's no way to attack a tax provision on constitutional basis. And that never sat well with me either. What we've seen in the economic impact payment was actually when the IRS decided that incarcerated persons weren't eligible for the economic impact payment, that the Center for Taxpayer Rights and several people on this call got together with a class action law firm, Leaf Cabraser, and we all agreed that Leaf Cabraser would bring the class action on behalf of incarcerated persons. And the ninth, a district court judge in the Ninth Circuit basically found that the IRS had acted, that the IRS's action had no basis in law. It was contrary to law, and therefore it was arbitrary and capricious, and it was under equal protection and several other constitutional bases, as well as the Administrative Procedure Act. And so that the IRS reversed its position, in the distance of 6 months because of that suit. It did not, they tried to appeal certain aspects of it to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit said, we're not interested. So it's very interesting to see that. There's one right now that's being brought by a professor at Villanova and some folks at Georgetown, dealing with the denial in the statute of the CARES Act for US citizen children of parents who do not have Social Security numbers and their eligibility for the economic impact payment. And that's solely on equal protection grounds. Well, there are other grounds too, but you're seeing arguments being made, standing arguments, timing arguments, jurisdictional arguments, all being made. And I think that there's a very great future for bringing constitutional due process issues, looking at the IRS as an administrator of social benefits. And those are very challenging, but the IRS has never been challenged on those bases. And if you're interested in that, I think that the field is wide open.
Yeah, and I would just add in, Nina, if I may, before we go to the panel, that if you like the idea of tax and constitutional law, you should get into multi-state taxation, because there's tons of Commerce Clause and other issues raised by multi-state taxation. That's actually really where the Wild West is. Like when Anita talks about the IRS, just like blow that out to extreme craziness in terms of the multi-state community. And, and there was a Wayfair case that came out of the Supreme Court. Read that case, and then I'll tell you how interesting it is on what states do that are overreaching or what they can get away with. So I think there's something there. And also I would note, if you like comparative law, there's a ton of international law with tax, in comparing tax regimes, making payments in one jurisdiction, foreign tax credit rules in the other jurisdiction, transfer pricing, which I think Bree practices in. There's a ton of ability to practice in comparative law if you are a kind of multicultural sort of person as well, in addition, and you're still in that tax framework. So I think tax can house all of your interests, I would say.
Digital taxation is a huge issue.
Correct. Yeah, technology as well.
It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And the final thing I'd say on this point is, if you're interested in sustainable development, developing countries and economic equality internationally, there's a United Nations Committee on Taxation. There's OECD, the things that they're looking at in terms of information exchange. The developing countries are a very strong position on that, which is not aligned with the European and formerly colonial countries. So you can really see a lot of really interesting work in that area. So Tameka, if you want to weigh in on these things.
For sure, absolutely. In terms of being a female and being a Black female in the this particular profession is challenging. The way it usually shows up for me is that, one, I feel like people are surprised that I have the aptitude maybe to work in this area of law. And then not only that, but really underestimate me, as they do all women, and the way I kind of counter that is I just see it as an opportunity just to really show up. And so I make it a point to always be prepared. My colleagues always laugh at me and they say I over prepare, and I probably do. But I always make sure I'm prepared. I am prepared for class. I am prepared for presentations. I am prepared for everything that I do, because I want to show up and I want to show people that I am not only capable of doing this type of work, but that I am a thought leader in this area, and I'm an authority in this area, and I can be counted on to contribute in this area. And so I am always prepared. One of the things I think that I have benefited most, and I know we said that we talk about this a little bit, and something that's really helped me navigate that too, is that I've had wonderful mentors. And not only wonderful mentors, but I've had, and I think this is something that people don't always talk about, is I've had wonderful sponsors. So for me, mentors have been great because they have really like been sounding board for me. And they have, you know, especially being a newly minted attorney running a clinic, I mean, people literally gave me their materials and gave me their classroom stuff and said, these are my educational slides, and these are the things that I'm doing, and I'll review this with you. I'll talk to you about this. And so people were extremely generous with their time as I navigated, you know, challenging issues, whether it was with colleagues or, you know, because I taught at a school that I had been a student at. So I was a student turned colleague, which was really challenging. And so I just had the benefit of having really good mentors. They helped me navigate those kinds of issues. But sponsors were also good. And I think that that's what people don't talk about. Sponsors are people that sometimes they're your mentors, but those are also people that have professional capital or political capital that they are willing to spend for you. And so they are in the rooms where decisions are being made, and they know about the work you're doing. They see you showing up, they see you being really prepared and bringing your A game. And so because of that, they're able to put in a word for you and really catapult your career in other areas. And so while I think it's really challenging for women in general, particularly Black women in the profession, I think that being prepared and having really good mentors and really good sponsors is really helpful.
You know, the other issue that I was thinking about is, and several of us have talked about this, you know, our children, you know, making choices and dealing with the child rearing responsibilities that we have. And in my life, you know, I was a single mother with my son, and when I was going to law school, and my son did a lot of his homework in the North Carolina Central University Law Library at night while I was, you know, in classes for 3 hours. And, you know, he'd play with his toys while I was sitting at the desk in my bedroom studying over the weekends. And, you know, it was just something we would do homework together. When I started the Community Tax Law Project and, you know, basically subsidized it for the first few years with my own private practice, which was a solo practice, you know, there were days, and we talk about this a lot, where we were rolling pennies from the change drawer, you know, in order to buy food. And Lucid really remembers that, but it's not a bad memory for him. It's a memory of, Anita was talking about what her daughter remembers, you know, it's a memory of that we made choices, and I never hid from him the choices that he was going to have to make a sacrifice if I did these things. And, you know, even from the age of 10, he was aware of that. You know, and that's not a path that everybody chooses, but it was a path that we did together. And I think it was one that, you know, helped form who he is today.
I mean, I definitely would add into the comment, if someone made a question about, you know, when you're the only woman in the room. You know, I guess I tried to end on a high note here that, you know, with the all female team that I mentioned, but I certainly remember beginning, and I will say that you will be the only woman on some all male teams. And, you know, that's fine. You know, you can bring diversity of thought. You know, I did face things that I wish never happened. I remember one time I found this expert witness that was great, and, you know, the all male litigation team went to go interview that person, and I was left back, and they brought me a cookbook back, which from Ireland, which I don't even cook. So that was a little weird. I was like, what do you do with this? But I mean, you know, I think that, you know, don't let it stop you. You know, I mean, like Tameka was saying, you're just going to have to blow past it. And once you show up, like Tameka was saying, you're never going to see it again, because you won't. So, I mean, just go into it and say, I wish we could all be surprised, but you might not be surprised, and just get over it, show up, and, you know, you won't see it again from those individuals.
Love that, Anita. And I think that is a great place to land. And so with that, I want to say thank you to all of the incredible panelists here and for sharing your stories so authentically. And also thank you to the fantastic Nina Olson for moderating our panel today. We couldn't have asked for a better group of women to join us. And we hope for all of you who were able to attend, we hope that you were able to get a good sense of the variety of public interest careers that are in the tax field. I'm going to ask Sarah Ma if she could repost the contact info for the Women in Tax Forum. And finally, before we go, I just want to tell you about 2 upcoming events for the Women in Tax Forum. We have a meditation series. It's starting next Wednesday, February 24th. And I think Sarah will also post the link to this if you want to register. It's going to be a 6-week-long wellness and meditation series. Like I said, it's starting next Wednesday. It'll be every Wednesday morning at 8:30 Eastern for 6 weeks, and each session will be 30 minutes. We'll have a meditation, stretching, and reflection, all while exploring the overarching theme of authentic leadership. And everyone is welcome. Whether you're a part of the Women in Tax Forum, male, female, everyone is welcome for that. And then one more announcement: on March 5th, we have our next Zoom tea, and that is with Manal Corwin. I think, Heather, you were going to post the link to that if you'd like to register. And as many of you probably know, Manal is the principal in charge of KPMG's Washington National Tax Practice. But before that, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the U.S. Treasury Department, and she was actively engaged in the origination and development of the OECD BEPS initiative. And we're very excited about that event on March 5th. So please join us for upcoming events. Thank you again for joining us today for this wonderful panel. And thank you again to Nina and all of the panelists for their participation today.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.